You're listening to LeaderCast, episode 51. Welcome to LeaderCast, Transforming Missions podcast with Tim Bias and Sarah Thomas, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers.
Last week, we started a series talking about what gets in the way of disciple making. Today, we want to explore the courage to name the real problem that gets in our way. So, I think today we'll take some time to name the disciple making problem, explore some outcomes that we want to achieve, which means we start where we are, and then where are we going, and then we'll end with how we're going to get there.
Before we start, if you listen to last week's episode 50, at the end of it, we gave you what we called a homework assignment. I want to remind you of that, but I also want to reframe it a bit, because as I've been thinking about that, I think what we really invited you into was an experiment. And why I want you to think of it that way is an experiment we can learn things from. We can learn things from homework too, but an experiment means that not everybody's going to be involved in it. And you're going to iterate. So you'll do it once and then you're going to try again because of something that you learned. So over the course of the next couple episodes, we're going to continue to invite you to experiment, having conversations with people in your community, specifically asking people, what do they love about your community and what needs to change in your community? So you can find that episode at transformingmission.org/050. And the experiment starts at about minute 53.
So what you're talking about is not completing a task, but going on an adventure.
Exactly.
We're going to discover something. So it's not necessarily something that you need to do or have to do, but it is something you participate in to discover something.
And I fully expect that because we have people who listen to this podcast that are in different contexts, those experiments are going to play out in different ways.
Yeah, wouldn't it be cool then that if we had enough people who were doing this, that we could have them have conversations about what they're discovering?
So there's your challenge, folks. Let us know what you're learning, and then we can have another conversation and bring you together about what you are learning. In this episode 51, and before we go any farther, let me tell you that you can find show notes for this episode, and there will be a few things that you might want to go back and read in front of you that will come up in this episode. You can find show notes at transformingmission.org/051.
So, Sarah, there are times, every time we're doing a podcast, there's a place where we kind of look at each other and say, now what? But you have a story to get us into this episode, don't you?
I do. So I was being introduced as the new pastor to a local church, and I remember asking the committee that I was meeting with this question: what do you tell your friends about this church? I was trying to get a sense of what they loved about the church and how they were talking about this local congregation to see if I could get a pulse on what the culture of this congregation was and what really resonated with me. And they looked at me with a puzzled look and kind of started looking at one another like, how are we supposed to answer that question? I don't know if they were thinking, is there a right answer, or what should we be saying, or what do I say to my friends? And then finally someone spoke up and said, well, all of my friends are a part of this church. I don't have to tell them anything because we all experience it together. And I hope I didn't make a visible sigh. I probably did. Because on one hand, it was clear that they had a beautiful community that they were a part of, that they had deep friendships and deep relationships within the congregation. And that was great. That was wonderful because there was truly a sense of community. It wasn't a group of strangers that gathered on Sunday morning. They were involved in one another's lives, and that was something to celebrate. But on the other hand, everyone that they knew was a part of the church. There weren't new relationships being developed, nor were there concentrated efforts to reach the people who lived in the neighborhood. That's what I came to learn as I stepped into ministry there. And those symptoms were evidence of the challenge that existed in that local church and that exists in many others. Now, for some, it doesn't present itself as all my relationships are here. It simply presents itself as a disconnection with the community around you. People come, they attend, they leave. They don't even have the basis of relationship within that community. So I started to hear, and over the course of years of ministry, hear a lot of conversations about people talking about what we don't have. Well, we don't have enough money. We don't have enough children. We don't have enough youth. We don't have enough families. We don't have people who want to do anything. And clearly there was a problem that needed to be addressed. And there is a problem that needs to be addressed. And often we name that problem as a scarcity problem. But it's not a scarcity problem. It's a disciple-making problem.
So that's where we start today. The problem of making disciples, and it's not. Let's do it this way. Because we may not know how to make disciples, that becomes the problem. We focus on what we don't have because it's easier to focus on what we don't have than to learn what we might need to do to be the church we need to be.
Yes. Yeah. And so
I had to say something profound in this podcast.
So let's just get this scarcity conversation out of the way.
Well, the question, one of the things that always fascinated me when as a pastor and preaching and trying to help with stewardship, and stewardship is not the only place where we talk about scarcity, but it permeates who we are and the culture of our congregations, because the question is, how much is enough? And the answer is just a little bit more.
Right.
So we never have enough people. We never have enough children. We never have enough youth. And the default in a dysfunctional kind of way, from my perspective, is that if we just had enough, a few more children, or if we had a good youth program, we could do what we need to do. Or if we could take care of the people who've been with us for years. These are all important, but that's not the focus of making disciples.
If we were playing football, I'd throw a penalty flag right now. If we were playing basketball, I'd blow a whistle and call a foul. If I was playing tennis, I'd call you out of bounds on that serve, because those are excuses. That's what you just named. Those are excuses that we make that get in the way of us engaging in disciple making. And so if you need reminders of some of those excuses, go back to episode 50 and listen to the first half hour, because we list at least 13 of them there. So I get it. Without people, without money to engage in the mission, it's hard. But I'm going to go back 2,000 years ago. The movement that Jesus started, that we are a part of today, started with one person. It started with Jesus. And he identified a group of people that he invited to be in community with him. And then from there, it continued to spread. So folks, you only need one other person. That's all that you need. And disciple making does not cost any money. So let's just set that aside and say we don't have a scarcity problem. We have a disciple making problem. We're not trying to get more people into a church building, although every single one of us would welcome having more people join us on Sunday morning, more people join us for the ministry. We want people to become followers of Jesus. So if we haven't been helping people for 20, 30, 40, 50, in some places 60 years, to learn how to follow Jesus and invite them to invite people to learn how to follow Jesus, we can't expect it to be fixed overnight.
So that I'm just going to repeat what you said in a different way. And that is, if we focused on making Jesus followers or helping people become Jesus followers, we wouldn't have to worry about the scarcity.
And we wouldn't be worried about numbers.
Right. I mean, what we're worried about then is developing the relationship that actually makes a difference, not only in our lives, but the lives of the people we're developing relationships, which then is in the community and the rest of the world. That's what would be focused on, not upon what's the next program or what do we need to do to get more people in, and then what we end up doing with any of those is doing what we like, what makes us feel good, because we're trying to I'm not going to say this the right way, feel good about what we're not doing. So we keep trying to find counterfeit ways to take care of that. That's another way of saying it.
We're really inviting you into a long-term adventure with Jesus. And I say that because the only reason why we're having this conversation 2,000 years later is because guess what? It's been long-term. Now, if you're thinking right now, well, I'm not so sure it's been 20, 30, 40, 50. Gosh, it certainly hasn't been 60 years since we've stopped focusing on disciple making. If I had those of you that were listening in a room together, and I asked you to get in a circle based on the number of years that you have been participating in the life of the church, or called yourself a follower of Jesus, called yourself a disciple, however you want to name that. Tim, where do you think the majority of people would end up? And I know you don't have to think this because we've done this before.
Somewhere between the 30, 40-year range. But then if they're like me, it would be 50, 53 years.
So I say that to say this didn't happen yesterday, but you can start addressing it today. But first, we have to consider what outcomes we want to work towards.
So before you do that, hang on to that. What we've just done is to name our current reality. And it sounds like we're being very negative. Part of courageous leadership is to name the reality that we're in. And the reality that we're in is we have a disciple-making problem, not a scarcity problem. And so now we're ready to talk about where we want to go, or the outcomes or the goals we need to have. Now, I interrupted you.
Well, what I was going to say to that is current reality isn't a value judgment. It's
right.
A statement of fact.
Right.
And so please don't hear us saying we haven't been doing this for 20 to 60 years as a value judgment of you. That's current reality. And we can't change something until we name what current reality is. And so you've got to get clear on what you're looking at so that you can move forward.
Yeah, if you go to the doctor and the doctor says, we're going to have bypass surgery, The doctor doesn't say that to you because the doctor doesn't like you.
Right.
The doctor says that because you're sick.
And he wants you to live. Huh?
And he wants you to live. And so it's not a value judgment, as you've just said. It's a statement of reality. And now that we've named reality, we can then talk about what we need to do.
How do you talk about outcomes when it comes to disciple making? Yes, I'm asking you.
You just asked me a question?
Yeah. How do you talk about outcomes when it comes to disciple making? I'll give you a second to think. We've defaulted to counting things because it's easy. So we count the number of people who show up to worship. We count the number of people who participate in a Bible study. But that isn't measuring transformation, and it's certainly not measuring change. It doesn't tell us whether people are followers of Jesus, and it certainly doesn't tell us if from one year to the next, the people who have been sitting in a chair or in a pew or gathered around a table have grown or changed in any way. All that tells us when we count something is that they've been present. We have a warm body there. That's what it tells us. Over the years in the ministry that I've participated in, one of the ways we measured discipleship was whether people produced the fruit of the Spirit. In other words, are you Christian? Does your living produce love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control? You can't count that. There's not a way to say, well, you give a 10 to this and a 3 to this. So then the next part of that, it begs the question, how does that show up? It shows up in relationships. It shows up in the way we interact with one another. It shows up in the way that let's just very simply say, in a meeting, it's not demanding your own way. It's actually having a conversation with people and learning from people and becoming who we need to be because people offer themselves to us. Now that's in a personal way. Another way to measure is does the church, we as a community, make a difference in the community that we're involved in? The backward way of asking that question is, if the church didn't exist, would the community miss us? I don't think that's a backward way to ask it. I think that's a direct way to ask it. And taking that a step further, you might see in your community a problem that is happening. So right now, something that is happening nationwide is the opioid epidemic and the number of people that are not only addicted, but dying from overdoses. So that may be something that is important to your local church. It might not be. I'm not telling you to make that your outcome. This is an example. If it is the place that you say, this is how we're going to measure transformation, from one year to the next, are there more people who are receiving care for addiction and stepping into a recovery process? Are there fewer deaths from overdose? Are there more resources in your community to address it? Those would all be ways that you could measure the transformation that was happening. I want to go back to what you were saying about the fruit of the Spirit. One of the things that I have heard local church leaders do with something like the fruit of the Spirit is to invite everyone in the congregation one Sunday to do a personal assessment and simply ask the question, where are you at right now in sharing the fruit of the Spirit with others? Where are you at with love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, and self-control? And do a baseline understanding and invite them to tuck it into the back of their Bible and of course, it comes up in sermons, it comes up in meetings that you have, it comes up in small group studies, it might come up in other communication, keeping it in front of people and reminding people, folks, this is what we're heading towards. And then a year later, coming back and doing the same thing and asking people, okay, where are you at now? Let's look at this. Okay, now pull that assessment from last year out and let's look. Where are you at? Oh, crud. Joy has gone down, but love, I'm in a completely different place. Patience, here are the ways when I think about the change that's happened in my life. So you start to have people having conversations about what has begun to change and how that change has happened. And as you pointed out, it happens in relationship with other people. So what we're inviting you to do and to think about, and we've given you a couple of different ways to think about it, is what are the outcomes that you're working towards? What are you trying to achieve? And you've got to get more specific than simply making disciples. You've got to get more specific than transforming our community. What does that look like? What are the behaviors that go along with that you'll be able to say, yes, it's happening, or no, it's not happening?
And that's part of the reason we do the experiment, because then we're in the community and we're finding out what the needs and the assets of the community are. So we've asked you to do this experiment. It's similar, although it's different, but it's similar to those 7 missional questions that we've talked about over and over the past year. So if the universal becomes more specific or particular, so it's more about, yes, we're about making disciples, but what would it be like if what we said that disciples are people who are engaged in their community, and you chose one place for that engagement, and if that engagement were with a local school, or if that and you don't just pick the school because we say it on a podcast. It's because there are children that are hungry, or there are children that need care. There are families that the way you're able to develop the relationship is through their children. Let me give an example. This is I'm going to start with the negative piece, and that is, if you're going to do a backpack program, let that be the doorway in developing the relationships for that transformation or becoming disciples. The backpack program is an instrument to the transformation. It is not the task. It is not what has to is what you do that, but that's not the end.
You would be counting backpacks.
You'd be that. I guess that's what I want to do. We'd be counting backpacks, and there are things that just running through my mind now, because every church I've been in, we've had to resist stopping at look at what we have done. We put food into, and we would name a number of backpacks. But what I wanted to say is that in one church where I was in a community where everything was evaluated, because that's where Caterpillar was located. So Caterpillar worked in an evaluation culture. They evaluated everything. So when we started a little ministry with a local school, I can give you numbers of kids, but after we had done this for 10 years, we evaluated the program, not based on numbers. We had somebody from Bradley look at the school, look at the church, look at the community. And what we found from the baseline that they put in place when we started 10 years before is that there were more children sleeping in beds in the community since we started that relationship. There were fewer children going to bed hungry. there were more adults involved in the community. There were places for children to participate with each other and with adults in the community. And it was directly related to the relationship that the church and the school had established. And it started with developing relationships with second graders.
You just provided a wonderful example of the change or the transformation that was happening. And so we started today with what is current reality and naming the challenge or the problem. What do you see around you? And we're moving right now towards where do you want to be? What is the outcome? What's the transformation that you are seeking to make happen? Because we have given you several examples. We have given you several examples, but the method is not the point here, folks. We're giving you the examples so that you can hear the change that happened and how that was measured and how people looked at it. So don't get caught up in the methods that we're talking about. Stop and ask yourself the question, what's the change what change do we want to see in our community? And that comes from the conversations that you're having as you go out with your square squad, one by one, and ask 3 to 5 people. See, I've just given you an out. I've now changed it 3 to 5. I told you 5 last week. Ask 3 to 5 people, what do you love about this community? And what are the challenges or what needs to change in this community? You'll start to name what the transformation is that needs to happen. That becomes a vehicle for you to begin engaging in the lives of people in the community, to begin relationships. And I think that's where we want to shift to in this last part of the podcast is how do we go about doing that? And where does that, what does that look like? So, Tim, you just gave an example of serving in the community. And when I think about how we talk about a disciple-making process, journey, pathway, whatever word you want to use, we talk about the 4 aspects of a disciple-making process being hospitality, reaching out and receiving new people, offering Christ, sharing God's love with people, offering them an opportunity to make a commitment to Christ. The P is for practices. How are you practicing the faith? Through prayer, through worship, through the spiritual disciplines. And then the E is engagement. And that is engagement in service beyond the church walls. As I think about where do we start with, once we've identified, here's what current reality is, here's the transformation that we're seeking to have happen, I have found that engagement is the part of the disciple-making process that I find to be the easiest to step into building relationships with people that then set us up to be on that disciple-making pathway. If we're starting from a place of engagement, if we're serving in our community with people, and that's because we've addressed and identified a change that needs to happen, and we want to be helpful in making that change happen. So the first thought that comes to mind, if I'm going to serve some place, I'm likely going to be doing something new. And so let me remind you, that's going to mean that you're going to have to be a courageous leader. You're going to step into this from likely a place of vulnerability. And let me remind you of Brené Brown's definition that vulnerability is the emotion we experience during times of uncertainty, risk, or emotional exposure. So if we want people to step into disciple making, and we're beginning from a place of engagement. I'm stepping out to serve with other people. I'm building a relationship with them because we're doing something together. So I'm having conversations with people. One of the places that I have gone on is a furniture bank. Yes, I said a furniture bank. A place that provides furniture for people who are moving out of either a shelter or they may have been incarcerated and they're establishing housing for the first time. And so if I'm going to go do that, I may go by myself and there may be other people there that I'm going to do that with, or I'm going with a group of people. So I'm building relationships at multiple levels. I'm building relationships with the people that I'm serving with, but I'm also building relationships with the organization that is hosting us, and I'm building relationships with the person who is receiving the furniture. We're going to have an opportunity to have conversation with someone who's setting up a home for the first time. And you may be thinking, but Sarah, that's not the point. Yes, it is. Delivering the furniture is the excuse.
That's the doorway.
That is the doorway to be able to have the conversation. So notice what I didn't say in that. I didn't say, if you want to make disciples, get people into a classroom and put together a 6-week class and learn lots of facts about the Bible and about Jesus. Now, please hear me. We need to know who Jesus is. We need to read the scripture. That all comes under the P part of hope with practices. But if that is what we limit disciple making to, we're going to run ourselves out of existence. And I say that, and I say it with confidence, but I say it with care, because that is what I have seen in the life of the church and what we say is disciple making. So if you're saying, but Sarah, now you're talking about service, that's not disciple making. Yes, it is. Because what you are doing with folks and what you are embodying is the life of a disciple. You are sharing God's love in service with others. So if you want to up the ante, and if you're doing this with a group of people, and you want to be explicit about the fact that this is an act of disciple making, you start your time together by reading scripture together. And it doesn't need to be a long passage. Read a scripture together, invite people to reflect on it, give them a question. This should sound familiar because we've talked about it before, and then head out to serve. And before you leave from whether you've moved furniture into an apartment or taken furniture out of some place from somebody donating it, however you've been a part of that, stop together and answer the question that you've been living with and reflect on what you just experienced. And if you want a really broad, generic question that works every time, simply ask people, where did you see Jesus in what we just did? That's all you have to do. And you've just invited people to stop and reflect on the experience that they've had. That is the easiest way. That it's easy, but it's not simple. Hear me. It's going to take time. It's going to take investment. But I didn't have to organize whose home we were going to go to. I simply needed to make a phone call and say, hey, I want to come serve. Where do you need me? What time do you need me to be there? And I showed up. And I may take a couple of friends along with me. You see what I did in the midst of that? I also added the P of hope into that. Now, sometimes when I have done that, the people that we have taken furniture to, or in lots of other serving settings, whether it's been a meal that we've been serving or a food pantry that we've been a part of, notice that I'm I'm speaking about relational ministries. I'm not speaking about places that you're simply doing tasks. And that's an important note to make. You want to do things that are in relationship with other people, not just in relationship with the people that you already know or you're taking with you, that there are people you are serving with in this journey. Sometimes what will happen is someone will ask the question that will go something like this. Why are you doing this? Why are you taking a Saturday to come be a part of this with us? Or they'll say, thank you for taking your Saturday and being a part of this. I don't know why you do this, but I appreciate it. Door just opened wide.
It's an invitation.
To say, can I tell you why I do this? I do this because I'm a follower of Jesus. And because I know and have experienced the love of God in and through Jesus Christ, it's important for me to share that with others. The number of times that simple statement has been met with a response of, you're a Christian? You're a follower of Jesus? Or, I'm so glad to hear that you said that. One of the first things that I need to do now that I have a home is find a church that I can be a part of. Or, will you pray with me? Sometimes, if we're feeling really bold, we'll simply invite people to say, we're gonna pray for what just happened and for you and your family. Would you like to join us? What are we doing in that moment? We're offering Christ. We're building relationships with new people. So we've also offered hospitality. Now, what did I just do? I worked backwards. In terms of the letters of hope, I started with engagement. I added practicing the faith onto it. We had an opportunity to offer Christ. And yes, in the midst of that, hospitality was being offered. We were building relationships with new people. I know people from that place who then go on to mentor folks and come alongside them in that journey to continue taking the next steps in that. But it all started because someone showed up and took a first step. So I use that example to say, I think we think that people are simply going to show up at our church door or stop in to worship on Sunday morning. And finally, we've got them captive, and now we can make disciples. It's not how this works any longer. We're living in a missional time.
So maybe one of the ways to, and you've done an excellent job of helping us see a process of hope. But maybe one of the things we need to remind ourselves that gets in the way of disciple making is that we're doing something to and for other people. And it's actually we who are becoming the disciples by the engagement.
Did I not say that?
Well, you've probably said that over and over. Sarah, I just think we lose that because so deeply woven into the thought of every congregation. And I know very few where this does not prevail. And that is what we do is either for ourselves or for somebody else. We don't think about how our engagement in the community or how our engagement with each other is helping us be the disciples that we're supposed to be. The goal is not to make other people do something or be something. The goal is that we are who God created us to be. And that's very difficult when we're just sitting and looking at each other. It's when we get out and engaged with, as you said, we have to think about it in a new way. We're engaged with new people. We're talking about new things. That's what gets in the way of disciple making.
Yes.
I made you speechless. So
I guess why you made me speechless is because that's what you just said is maybe so much a part of who I am that I don't always see it. But listening to you say it in the way that you said it, I think the key that helps people to recognize that they are on a journey of being formed in Christ, they are on a journey of following Jesus, are those moments of pausing to pray together and read scripture together, the moments that you're inviting people to stop and reflect. Otherwise, it's a task. It is a task that you're doing to somebody else. And you're trying to play the hero in something. And for a moment, you're going to temporarily feel good. And then you're going to go back to your everyday, ordinary life, and you're going to forget about the people that you just met. Because there's no transformation. It's a task. But when it becomes a journey that you're on, and you frame it in that way, again, this is why we started with current reality and then started talking about outcomes, and now we're talking about a process to help you think through that. If you don't have a process set up to think through that, you're going to miss the opportunity, and it is going to become a task. You're going to miss the opportunity to pause and reflect. You're going to miss the opportunity to pay attention to where's God moving in the midst of this. You're going to miss the opportunity to pause and say, thank you, Jesus, because I needed to see this today, because you needed to change my heart about how I see and perceive people who are moving into housing for the first time because they've been in prison.
So the process, and we're coming to the time where we're going to add more to this experiment. But this process is really seen in everything we do in a local congregation. Because if what we're trying to do, we have a goal, an outcome, and we know what our current reality is, then everything we do is moving us toward that outcome. And when there are barriers, we find ways to move around the barriers or through the barriers or remove the barriers. But there are places you started with the engagement. Yeah, and I don't want us to stop here, but sometimes that practice can be done in a church council meeting or in a finance meeting or a trustees meeting where we think all we're talking about is administration or money or caring for a building. What happens if we read that scripture and we talk about how Jesus shows up in our finances or how Jesus shows up in the trustees' work, which leads us to, all of what I just mentioned facilitate the engagement in the community. What good is the building if we're not using the building as a jumping off place to be involved in the community? The building is a facility. It facilitates the mission or facilitates the work in the community. I don't think we think of it that way. The building is mine, and we're going to do what I want to do with the building because my grandfather was here, my grandmother was here, my family's all been here, and we're going to use this building the way I want to. And the building, and the reality is, that's what gets in the way of discipleship. It's not the scarcity. It's an attitude which is not producing the fruit of the Spirit. It's an attitude that takes us to the place of hopelessness and not of hopefulness.
The last thing that I want to offer before we give you your experiment to continue with for today is, as I reflect on the places and the times that I have the privilege of serving in the community, when I recognize that the purpose of serving comes from what I've already articulated as the love that I know in Jesus, I know that I'm going to be leading from a place of vulnerability. I know there is going to be risk involved. And because I know that it's from a place of love, and to love is to be vulnerable, I know it's worth the risk. Even when it doesn't go as I planned. Oh, and it never does. Even when I fail to do what I thought I should have done, or I say something stupid, or I don't know what to say or what to do because of the situation that's presented, even when I'm shocked by what I experience, even when I have those moments of being a human that happen way too much, and I want to fix the situation that I'm in because I see that someone is hungry or in a financial hardship or they're unemployed, and I want to fix it for them. That's part of my humanity, that I want to help. I want to make it right. And the reality is I can't. And that's where we go back to the people that we introduced you to in the last episode. Your square squad, the people whose opinions of you matter. The people who, when you have those difficult, challenging moments, you can say, okay, this is what happened, and I need your help in thinking differently about this. Help me to try again. Help me to learn from this. Sometimes that happens in me simply saying, I just need to verbal vomit so that I can move on and get past this. Sometimes I need to process what just happened, and I need your help in working through this. Those are the people who help me to see that I can do it differently, and who challenge me to keep moving forward, to keep experimenting, if you will. So I shared where I begin, and that is with service, because it's a natural way for me to meet new people and to practice and live out the love that I know in Jesus Christ. It's also a place that I get to share that love. So for your experiment this week, we want you to consider these questions. Where do you begin? As you think about hospitality, reaching out and receiving new people, offering Christ, giving folks an opportunity to make a commitment to Jesus, practicing the faith, all of the spiritual disciplines, worship, prayer, reading the scriptures, engagement, which one of those do you begin with? And then, what does that look like for you?
So another question you would ask is what fears or excuses or ideologies get in the way of offering hospitality or Christ or practicing or engagement?
The third question is, what's the one thing you need to feel safe, to risk hope? That is the process of disciple making. So if you did last week's homework/experiment, congratulations. You're already on your way. And if you did, remember you're now inviting another person to join you in this little experiment. If you didn't do last week's homework, go ahead and get started this week with the experiment that we've been talking about. Have a conversation with one person in your square squad about the 3 questions that Tim and I just walked through, and then head out and ask 5 people in your community what they love about your community, what needs to change in your community, and if they'd be willing to be a part of addressing the changes.
That sounds like a good experiment to me.
So you can find each one of those questions written out on the show notes page at transformingmission.org/051. Well, as we always remind you, this podcast is about helping you to lead a movement of Jesus followers. So as you reflect this week on the current reality, the outcomes that you're seeking to achieve, as well as the process that you're going to take to get there, go lead a movement of Jesus followers. Bye for now.